The production of this show follows the LORMA College's health and safety protocols. Hosts not wearing masks are appropriately distanced, and all on-site crew have proper safety equipment on set. The LORMA Channel.
It is impossible to find someone who does not experience emotional breakdowns, as it is already a part of honing both our emotional and mental stability. Therefore, we must learn the distinction of the things we feel for us to overcome these challenges. My name is Chloe Langay, and join me as we unravel the difference of stress and depression for today's episode on Everyday Health. Our guests for today will be Ms. Sheena Marie Tayaban and Michelle Y. Ao-asen. They will be discussing more about stress and depression and their differences. We are so honored to have you here with us, ma'am. Can you please tell me more about yourselves?
I'll start, I guess. I am Sheena. I teach psychology subjects under the College of Education and Sciences. And
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm also a faculty member of the College of Education and Sciences and the program head for AB Psychology program.
Without further ado, I do believe that our audiences are so excited to hear your voices. So, are you ready?
yeah, I guess.
So, let's talk about more on what is stress.
Actually, that is a very timely question, especially considering the current situation that we are in. But stress basically is the body's response to any threat, whether it be a perceived threat or an actual threat. And with stress, it can originate or it can come from the different life events that we experience. Any change, anything new, any pressure, whether it be internally or extrinsically originating from, those are probable sources of stress. And basically, stress tells us that, wait, there's something wrong and that we need to do something about it. So we need to do something in order to stabilize or lessen the stress.
Since stress is very common among age and it does not pick any gender, it is important to know, is stress always bad?
I like this question because it's one of the things that I want to emphasize whenever I'm given the chance to talk about this topic, because most people would tend to look at stress from a negative perspective, wherein when we hear the word stress, we tend to associate it with pressure, demands, deadlines, sleepless nights, and the like. But the truth is, stress, as mentioned by Ma'am Sheena, it's the reaction of our body. Therefore, it could be positive or it could be negative. So there are instances wherein when we encounter changes or new demands from us, our reaction is positive, wherein we tend to be excited about it. We anticipate it, we look forward to it. That excitement that we are feeling, that is basically stress. And one thing is, stress, if it is given in the right amount, it could actually benefit us. It could drive us or motivate us to achieve our goals. Like, let's say for you students, diba? When you are given a new homework or task and you like it, plus the deadline is reasonable, you are pressured, but then that pressure motivates you to finish it and not procrastinate.
And then actually to add, that stress that Ma'am Michelle is trying to explain is eustress. The term is eustress. It's good stress because it's part of the basic human condition. Stress is part of the basic human condition. And we are able to move and do good things because of this eustress. So that's just an additional.
If you want to know more about depression, tune in after the short break.
I am now in my third year as a Lormanian, and so far, my experience here at LORMA Colleges has been both exciting and rewarding. Learning has never been this easy and enriching because the instructors I have make learning worth my while and diverse that I get to learn in many different ways. I have grown with the help of this value-driven institution by exposing me to several competitions that I have aced, and the deans and instructors molded me to become empowered with the knowledge and skills that honed me to be a better version of myself. I am Leia May Taiza, third year BS Tourism Management, proud Lormanian.
Welcome back on Everyday Health. So now we will be focusing more about depression. Ma'am, what is depression?
Depression is actually a word that we often hear, but okay, when you try to define it, it's actually much more complicated because it is a debilitating mood disorder. It is a psychological disorder, and as a psychological disorder, it has the four characteristics of the four Ds. We have your distress, dysfunction, deviance, and danger. Right? Which means that the person who is diagnosed with depression has to display all the four. Okay, so it's not as simple as feeling sad, feeling blue, feeling frustrated or helpless from time to time. Okay, because depression is also persistent. It's not that today I feel sad, then tomorrow I'll be fine. I was depressed yesterday. Right? It's not as simple as that. So let's say distress. I feel sad right now. And for people with depression, it becomes too overwhelming that it may lead them to be dysfunctional. They can no longer function their day-to-day functions or day-to-day roles. Okay, so they can go to school, they can even attend to their needs, they can even take care of themselves, take a bath. They don't have the energy for that one. Okay, and with that, it might lead them to be deviant. They might appear to behave in a certain way that is weird to different or different to other individuals, or it might also lead them to engage in behaviors that might be dangerous to themselves and to other people. Okay, so you see, following those four characteristics, or you looking at depression with the four characteristics, it's not really as simple as sadness, and that's one thing that I would like to emphasize to everyone. Right? That depression is not a word that we just simply utter, because there's gravity to saying that a person is depressed. Take note, it is persistent, it is debilitating, and it is beyond the feeling of sadness. So I guess that's how I define it.
Since depression is a mental illness, how does a person know that he actually has depression and not just stressed? What is the difference?
Yeah, that is a question that needs to be addressed, especially that most people nowadays are using the word depression or depressed ako to describe how they are feeling when they are feeling sad or when they are feeling frustrated. Although we are not invalidating their feelings, it's important to understand the terms that we are using because it leads to stigma and of course misconception. Okay, so with the difference between stress and depression, first, stress is again a normal part of our daily life. No, we are not able to finish something, so we get to be distressed. While for depression, again, as mentioned by Ma'am Sheena, it's a debilitating mental illness, and it's not something that happens to everyone. Okay. Another one is when it comes to its trigger. Stress is caused by simple daily life events, like for students not being able to submit homework, for employees not being able to finish a workload. For depression, it is triggered by a lot of factors, major life events. And sometimes what's worse is that we don't even know what specifically triggers it. That's why we don't know what and how to address it. Okay? And then in relation to that, with that said, the intervention or how we deal with it is also, of course, very different. For stress, we could learn strategies or techniques in order for us to cope with stress. While for depression, it's not something that we could cope with alone. Okay? We need the help of mental professionals. And it's okay to seek the help of those professionals.
And then I think one point to emphasize with depression is that sometimes patients need, or clients or people with depression need medication for their mood to be stabilized. And that way, that's the only time that talk therapy, talking to them, would actually get through the cloud that they are in. Okay, so it's not really simple, although it is common. It's one of the most common psychological disorders in the world all over, but it's not simple, right? That's one thing that we just want to emphasize.
In other people with depression, actually, and it's one of the most common characteristics of depression, the presence of suicidal thoughts or ideations or the tendency to harm oneself. And that's not something that happens with people who are stressed. Okay. But just to add one more, although stress, when it is not attended properly, if it is unattended and it persists for a very long time, it could be one of the risk factors for depression, but not the sole cause of depression.
Okay, so they are somehow related to each other.
Yeah, in that sense, na when stress is not coped with properly, it may be a risk factor for depression.
It's somewhat an alert, kumbaga. Stress alerts you that, oops, you need to address something in order for you to feel better. But if you're unable to cope with it nga, and then it stays, the feeling of sadness and distress, it becomes persistent, then it might lead to the possible development to depression.
It's important now while it's still early, while we can still cope with it, then we have to cope. We have to learn ways and not ignore it.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Going into my first psychology class didn't just feel like a warm welcome. It felt like seeing an old friend. I was surrounded by professors and colleagues who saw our department as a support system where we can encourage each other to become the better versions of ourselves every day. In our psychology department, we are always reminded that it's we will get through this and not just I will get through this. Here at the Department of Psychology, we are a family, a second home, and a reminder that every student belongs somewhere, even after graduation, and that place is here. I've been a Lormanian since grade school, high school, and now college, and it still always feels like home. I'm Melinda LaFranchi, AB Psychology, proud Lormanian.
Welcome back to Everyday Health. So, let's elaborate more on how dangerous self-diagnosis can get, since you've mentioned about professional advices.
While it is important to be aware or try to be alert, cautious with what we are feeling, how we are doing, it's important to get our facts straight. It's important to have the willingness to educate ourselves and not simply putting labels to what we are feeling. Because in the first place, once we have labeled ourselves incorrectly, how we deal with it would be incorrect also. And stigma. also comes from the misuse of terms that we are using. And instead of being helpful, it might as well be counterproductive on us.
And I guess, again, emphasis on the spreading of misconception. If you constantly misuse the word, then of course other people would learn that, okay, if I'm sad, I use the word depressed instead of sad. And then other people also use it, and then the younger generations would use it. And it's not really helpful. So it's better to correct it now and then educate ourselves, as emphasized by Ma'am Michelle. And that way, we are able to address the problem with the proper coping techniques. Because it's a different coping for people who are depressed, and it's a different coping for people who are stressed or people who are burned out. Again, if you know the problem, then you know exactly what to do with the problem. And using the word depressed willy-nilly doesn't really help kasi nga, everybody is depressed na. So everybody has to take medication. Everybody has to go to a therapist, maybe because they have concerns. But is it really depression?
But again, we would like to emphasize that we are not invalidating feelings here. Okay? The point is we have to label them correctly.
Yeah. So everyone is entitled to their feelings. And as we have mentioned, stress is a part of the basic human condition. We cannot run away from it. But depression is not the basic human condition. And we have to understand that one. People who are depressed need help. And we cannot give them that if there is so many stigma associated to depression. That's why they don't want to tell anyone what they're feeling, right? Because they don't understand it. And that's brought about by the stigma.
Okay, since stress is already a part of our daily lives, how can one cope up with stress and how can we manage it?
I guess there are lots of ways in order for us to cope with stress, and most of them we don't actually know that we're trying to cope with stress, but we're doing them. So when we get scolded at school, you go home and eat ice cream, you play with your pets, you talk to your friends, you talk to your family. Those are actually ways in order to cope with stress. But there are other ways that are more tailor-fit. Okay, tailor-fit to you and to the stressor. If, let's say, for example, your stress is coming from your activities given in school, then there are ways in order to cope with that, such as time management, right? And then at the same time, possible also changing your attitude towards the activities that are given to you. Because take note, as we've mentioned earlier with the discussion of what stress is, stress could come externally and intrinsically. Sometimes it is our thoughts that causes us to be stressed. It is our attitudes towards a stressor. And sometimes it is an actual stressor. You got scolded by your mother, and that's something that is stressful and frustrating at times kasi hindi tayo makasagot. We cannot talk back to our parents. So those things are simple examples of our day-to-day experiences of stress. And like I said, there are ways in order to deal with stress, simple ways, as we've mentioned. But at the same time, we can tailor fit it specific to the stressor that we want to address. Any thoughts, ma'am?
Yeah, just to add, because in terms of the coping mechanisms, there are suggested strategies or techniques, but it doesn't mean that those techniques are universal or that it applies to everyone. Because it depends on different factors as well. Like we have our individual differences. What is stressful for you may not be stressful for me. For instance, we have different stress threshold. Like an amount of something may be stressful to one person already, but not to another. So therefore, we may have differences also in terms of our coping. But there are general coping strategies, just like those that are mentioned by Ma'am Sheena. And just to add to those one, there are things that are common that I've heard and read, like taking time for yourself, having a me time in order to reflect. It's important also to talk to your friends, to your family, because social support is very important. And then I like this one. It's one of my favorites. But honestly, I don't know if I'm able to apply it all the time. But being able to be present with yourself and with the nature, with the things around you. Like when you are eating, you have to taste your food. You have to feel that you are eating, you know, and hear the sounds around you. Being present at the moment.
So coping mechanisms actually comes from within.
It could be. No. It
Somewhat.
could be intrinsic, meaning it comes from you. It could also be extrinsic. You need also other people.
Yeah, as she mentioned earlier, social support is very important. This is why we have encouraged earlier, okay, that if you need to seek help, you seek help. The same way, if you feel stressed and you feel like you need to vent it out, then you need someone and you contact someone. You don't just bottle it up within because it would come out in ugly ways. Right? So that's one thing that we need to consider. Aside from social support, I guess one more thing or one more important thing that Ma'am Michelle mentioned earlier was that in being with nature, okay, being fully present. Because being fully present, feeling the wind, feeling the heat of the sun, it makes you appreciate life. So seeing the small things rather than just the stressors, the sources of stress that we have, seeing the small beauties of life, such as the sunset, the clouds, the beautiful clouds, the trees, right? Those things would somehow make us feel better. But, right, emphasis, take note that stress is the body's response to a threat. There's something wrong. The stress would not go away if you don't do something about it. Right? So if your stressors would be activities in school, if you don't do the activities in school, they do not go away. You just make new stressors. Your teachers would scold you, your parents would scold you. Those are actually other stressors that would add to the initial stressor of the stressor, which are the activities. So you need to address it. But of course, like I said, there are different types of stressors. So there are stressors that are uncontrollable because we cannot do anything about it. But we can do something with ourselves, with our behaviors, the way that we react, the way that that our attitudes are towards the stressors. So if we can do something about that, then better do so for you not to fixate on the stress.
It actually makes sense now. It's very easy to understand.
Yeah, and with everything that has been said, we would just like to leave you with this closing statement that stress is inevitable, but we could cope with it. Depression is a serious mental illness, but it is treatable. We have mental health professionals, and there is hope.
And we've got the hope for you.
We have learned a lot from Miss Sheena and Miss Michelle. However, as we face these challenges, it is also important to differentiate it so that we can manage it and, of course, gradually conquer these challenges. Again, my name is Chloe Lang-I, and this is Everyday Health.